Welcome to another episode of No Power Panel. I'm Noam.
And I'm Isaac.
Thanks for joining us today. We are excited to be with you on Tariff Day. Today is August 1st. You'll be hearing this on August 2nd if you listen the day we're posting. It finally happened, Isaac.
Yeah, Taco Trump always chickens out that a lot of, economists and people in the States rely on as a mentality to make their prognostications, has not followed through today. The tariffs are being applied. So on all non-CUSMA goods, Canada has been levied a 35% tariff by the US. So I was convinced last week that it wouldn't actually happen, but I guess third time's the charm. And it's happening now. I'm still not convinced on how long it will last. I think this is just Trump's negotiation tactic, but it's going to cause a lot of pain in the short term, and I think it's in general idiotic. But yeah, those are my top line takes.
No argument from me on it being idiotic. I'm less convinced that it's going to be a kind of quick turnaround. I think that given that he has finally put them in place this time, and the fact that I was just listening to Dominic LeBlanc, who is Canada's Minister for Trade with the United States. Specifically, the United States was carved out of the international trade portfolio that another minister has and just handed to Dominic LeBlanc for him to maintain this relationship. And he was certainly indicating that, he and Howard Lutnick are going to talk at some point next week, and he'll be in D.C. a couple of weeks away, but he wasn't building up expectations that these were going to be short-term things.
Yeah, lots of takes have come out, both on the inner circle of Team Canada and on the outer circle. I saw a tweet just before I got on here that was from Erin O'Toole last night when the executive order was signed, and he said, "This executive order is more final stretch posturing. We can and will get a fair deal before September as the president needs one. i.e. EPA tariffs will likely be struck down by the courts and inflationary pressures and product shortages will begin to bite. Stay on target," and then a target emoji and a Canadian flag emoji. I do think Trump will be facing pressures domestically. The Dow is already down, I think, 1.3% today, both on the backs of a bad jobs report and the tariff news combined. There's few things that will affect Trump, and I think I've brought this up a few times. I do believe that his inner circle and the machine that kind of runs the Trump operation are a bunch of selfish people. And when their self-interest overrules Trump's, then I think that's when it starts becoming tumultuous, and I don't know if we'll see Trump with the follow-through. That's my take. That's why I'm not as bullish on them staying.
No, so to be clear, I agree with you in principle in that I think that probably we are not more than several weeks away from some kind of deal. I'm less convinced, I think, that the deal isn't going to result in some level of tariffs.
Yeah.
Right. So we saw that the deal that the UK got.
That's what I was about to bring up.
It's 10% on everything, right? And that's just now their standing existing relationship. I think that we are likely looking at something similar. That seems to be what he is trying to push most countries into with this posturing. My concern is for these couple of weeks that he's going to let the 35% stand. that's going to do a lot of damage to both economies, to
What
businesses and people. And in addition, this is all we also have to remember that this is all a ramp up to the renegotiation of CUSMA next year. Right? This is all about trying to get into the right negotiating position for that. So it's about whether he thinks that he can get a better deal in the long run by leaving these tariffs on longer, or if he thinks that the better thing to do is try and appease Carney and LeBlanc now, in the hope that they'll give more next year.
Well, and just as you said, like in the short term, like we can talk about what this will lead to in the long term in terms of a negotiation and a deal. But in the short term, this has the uncertainty itself has essentially, it's going to disrupt supply chains and, entire industries that are basically intertwined between Canada and the US right now.
Yeah.
And there's going to be a lot of economic pain in a lot of Canadian communities that won't be able to be undone in the next few years. It's going to take years to rebuild our trade relationships, rebuild our supply chains to reflect a new reality that doesn't come through the US and have our economy basically being essentially extension of the American economy, which we have relied upon for decades. And that reality, no matter what the tariff ends up being, no matter what the outcome of this negotiation ends up being, is going to exist. And the reality is that Canada is going to face hard times economically. You can't just these things don't happen overnight, essentially.
No, exactly. And the reality is that people are going to be hurt on both sides of the border by this action. And Trump is ideologically, I think that this is the thing about Trump, is that he has very few political ideologies that have stuck through over the course of his life. He's very wishy-washy on policies based on, in the moment, what he needs to be popularity-wise. And tariffs are something that is not true for. Tariffs are one of the few things that you can find clips going all the way back to the 70s and 80s of Trump talking about the need for increased tariffs across the board. He fundamentally has a misconception about what tariffs economically do. He's like a bro who read a textbook about the 1890s and early 20th century and took all of the wrong lessons from it. On immigration and tariffs and nationalism, and he just fundamentally has a McKinley style position on governing, and that fundamentally doesn't work, and we're all about to learn that in real time, even more so.
And the more power that Trump personally gains within his circle and within his administration, the more dangerous it becomes, because his own whims and ideologies can actually bear out, into policy, both in the sense of them actually coming to the table because no one's stopping him, but also within his administration or his advisors, but then also Congress, who has every right to stop him and can, they have the powers to be able to strike down. The president does not have unilateral decision-making powers when it comes to deciding international trade policy. But as Congress descends further into becoming the party of Trump, and the Republicans essentially will greenlight whatever he desires, that's where, as you said, he's held these positions for a long time. He held them in 2016 when he was elected the first time, but here we are 9 years later, and now they can actually be put into law unchecked by everyone around him.
Absolutely. It's why the midterms are going to be incredibly important as this conversation develops, because he is going to do whatever he possibly can to keep control of Congress in the midterms. He has experienced once already what it's like to lose that control halfway through an administration, and how from that point on, if you think about what got done in 2019 and 2020, with the exception of some bipartisan COVID legislation during the pandemic that everyone was on board with pretty much. Did he pass a single law in all of 2019 when the Democrats controlled the House? I don't know that he did. If he did, it wasn't anything of significance. And so he wants to avoid that this time. He saw that Joe Biden was able to tamp down the red wave that was anticipated by, in the first couple of years of his presidency, pushing his domestic agenda through as hard as possible. And Trump is now doing the same. Obviously, it's in the reverse course. But that is his goal here, in the hopes that his people will reward him for it. The reality is that polling-wise, he's polling terribly right now. He's still polling better than the Democrats. We have an evolving conversation on our show about how terrible the Democrats largely are right now. And this is a part of the reason why, because on issues like this, they are not fighting back in an appropriate way.
Exactly. And I have a little anecdote that might bring
Sure.
us into our next section. But you asked how many laws were passed in 2019. I'm on a list of the bills in the 116th United States Congress. Out of the ones introduced in the Senate, only 4 passed. One out of those 4 was the Combating BDS Act on January 30, 2019. Non-preemption of measures by state and local governments to divest from entities that engage in certain boycott, divestment, and sanctions activities targeting Israel or persons doing business in Israel or Israeli-controlled territories. So that was one of 4. And it was one of the first pieces of legislation that was passed in that Congress. It's actually S1 is the HR number. So it's the first one introduced in the bill introduced in the Senate in that entire Congress. And it was only one of 4. The other was Justice for Victims of Lynching Act. So these are the 2 that were from that first session that had bipartisan support and passed that Congress. So that shows you how, well, I don't even know the right word. It's just these like performative, quote unquote, bipartisan, bought off bills that make their way through at that point when there's that much of a deadlock. That's the only thing that gets through that has really no teeth and is just about, for lack of a better word, like kissing the butts of the people who donated to them, essentially.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Yeah, BDS is something that is necessary. It is something that it is the only proven way to defeat an apartheid state is through BDS. It was the way that South Africa was reformed. And for that to be, I mean, it's still wild to me that there's bipartisan support still for trying to make BDS illegal. There's bipartisan support in Canada for that. And it's just so wrong. Like fundamentally, whether or not you consider the laws of Israel to be apartheid or to be whatever, like it's factual that they are, but putting that aside, to I don't understand how small C conservatives, both in Canada and the United States, can think that it's right to dictate how somebody spends their own money, right? Like, doesn't that fundamentally, shouldn't that be opposed by libertarians and conservatives just on principle from a big government versus small government perspective? It shows you how powerful the Israel lobby is, that they are able to get some actually genuinely like people who believe in libertarianism and believe in smaller government for this to be the one issue where somebody like Rand Paul, I wouldn't, I would be willing to bet that Rand Paul was a yes on that piece of legislation. And he is somebody who genuinely has libertarian beliefs. I disagree with him on most of his policy ideals, but on something like this, you would think that a libertarian would say, no, the government can't tell me how to spend or not spend my own money. How dare you try to dictate that I have to give money to companies that support a country that I disagree with, whatever that country is, right? There are people who BDS Russia. There are people who BDS China. There are people who BDS almost every single country in this world for various reasons. It is a legitimate form of protest.
I will say Rand Paul was a no.
Okay.
So there were 23 no's, and Rand Paul was one of them. So in terms of
good on you, Rand Paul.
Yeah, in terms of sticking to his beliefs, he on this bill specifically, I guess that he did.
He still supports giving money to Israel on almost every single vote. So
I'm not making.
No,
I'm just saying. I'm just letting the record show, so there's no contention there.
So speaking of this topic, there's been some pretty major news in Canada and internationally this week. Prime Minister Mark Carney, after, I think it's fair to say, receiving some pressure, yes, from the Canadian public, but also from Emmanuel Macron specifically, has agreed to recognize the state of Palestine at the UN General Assembly in September. Emmanuel Macron has said that France will do the same, and Keir Starmer has kind of indicated that the UK will as well, maybe contingently. Has been a little bit more wishy-washy on it than the other two have been, I think it's fair to say, but also has moved in a better direction on this issue, has made it pretty clear that unless Israel does some things that we all know they are not going to do, the UK will join Canada and France in recognizing Palestine.
And recognizing is one thing, and it is a big step. So I'm not downplaying, we've spent decades of leaders of these countries refusing to take that step. But you also have powers at your disposal as Prime Minister of Canada. You could enforce an arms embargo. You could stop funding, the military that is effectively forcing, at this moment in time, mass famine on an entire population of people. So absolutely. You can recognize it, and that's the part where I think the discourse in terms of where political leaders and this centrist take of supporting a two-state solution and now acknowledging the legitimacy of Palestinian statehood breaks down. It's none of that means anything for lasting, I don't even know how to phrase this correctly, but lasting peace and security for the Palestinians.
Absolutely.
If you don't actually take your actions beyond those statements. The statements, there's no future two-state dream solution that you claim you want if you are still supporting killing the people, the citizen. So
Absolutely. I mean, the way that I look at it, and this is a very fundamentally correct point that you're making that needs to be emphasized, is recognizing a state and then doing nothing to actually defend the rights of that state to actually exist in a free and fair and reasonable world and safe world for them is just formalizing the apartheid. Right? If you are going to recognize that Palestine is a state, but then do nothing to deter Israel from continue treating that state as they have been treating it as an occupied territory, then all you're actually doing is formalizing the dispossession and apartheid, because Israel will then just say, well, we are then conquering this state. And that's how they will frame it. And as countries that have conquered other countries before, there's actually less of a duty to intercede on behalf of a sovereign state than there is on behalf of an occupied people. And so, absolutely, I'm not opposed to the recognition of a state of Palestine. I think that state exists. A majority of the countries in the world have already recognized it. Like, this is us catching up to where we should have already been. This is not us progressing towards an actual solution unless action is taken. The recognition of the Palestinian state does not meet the terms of the Rome Statute to prevent us from being complicit in the genocide. There are other actions that we could be taking, you're right, that would make us less complicit in a genocide. An arms embargo, formalizing BDS instead of opposing it in the way that we were talking about just a few moments ago. If it was formalized and if it was legislated, enforced as policy, that would also help end this genocide. There are things that we can be doing up to and including military action. Like, I personally am reaching the point with this where I don't see how this ends without some country putting feet on the ground in Tel Aviv and marching to the Knesset and putting people in handcuffs. Right? Like, as long as all that is being applied is economic pressure, and that's not even being properly applied right now. How does this end with Bibi Netanyahu doing anything but continuing to say, well, the actions of the people opposed to us are anti-Semitic, and we're going to keep doing what we're doing because that's what our populace wants us to do? A majority of Israelis support the genocide still. Yeah. And until that actually fundamentally changes, the only way to actually stop this, I'm not talking about doing what Israel has done in reverse. I'm not talking about targeted attacks on civilians, on Israelis, on anything like that. I'm talking about put troops on the ground and say, we're not leaving until you stop. Put troops on the ground in Palestine and say, we're going to fire on the planes that you're sending to bomb right now. That is, at this point, unless major economic pressures happen, that is the only way to solve this before more than 1 million people have been slaughtered in this genocide. And I don't know what else to do at this point other than support some kind of action like that. So obviously the way to solve this is through major BDS legislation, because countries aren't going to do that. There isn't going to be the support to do that kind of thing.
Yeah, like I'm like even more cynical in my analysis, because it's like, as you said, uh you're saying at this point economic action isn't even gonna do the job, like in terms of stopping Israel, but we're not even close to economic action.
No,
Because like we're just taking symbolic action, and the symbolic action isn't even like taking a stance against Israel. The symbolic action is
no.
just acknowledging statehood Palestine. So it's like we're so many steps removed from any, and it's only Canada, UK, Canada, France, and maybe UK. It's not even the US is taking that action to recognize Palestinian statehood. So to me, it's just like it feels so utterly, hopeless, like in terms of the
Absolutely.
reality of the situation.
And the US will be one of the last countries, if ever, to give any kind of recognition to Palestine. I think that there is something symbolic about three large G7 countries
100%.
coming out and doing this. I think that if you can get one more, if you can get a majority of the G7 on side, that at least says something. I also don't want to say no to a symbolic, even a symbolic win at this point. It's been years and years and decades of apartheid and slow genocide and now fast acting genocide that I think it's important to try and recognize what more needs to be done, absolutely, but also to appreciate and recognize when we have gotten some sort of victory, when we have gotten Mark Carney to recognize the state of Palestine. That is at least something. It's something that, should have been done years ago, and at this point it's a little too late. But let's not, let's not just attack on areas where we are getting some kind of victory. I think it's also important to recognize when some of the good things happen. This is, some of the best news the pro-Palestine movement has had, as sad as that is, in many years.
And in terms of there not being a lot of pro-Palestinian sentiment in like the West, I'm trying to find a segue here. I think there have been few voices who have been vehemently, you know where I'm going, who have been uh, vehemently trying to push this issue for years, even before October 7th and before Israel's latest siege on Gaza. And one of those voices might be coming to our show. Is that true, Noam?
Yes. Yes, it is. So we're very excited to announce that next week we'll be joined by Yves Zangler, who is one of, I think it's fair to say, Canada's foremost activists and experts and thinkers and writers on this topic, and he has been since before October 7th. We'll be joined by him to discuss this issue, along with his recently announced candidacy to lead the New Democratic Party of Canada, and to just kind of touch on his campaign, what he wants to be talking about, what he thinks the race is shaping up to be like, and where he thinks the left in Canada is going from here. So we're very excited to be having him come on to join us for an interview about his campaign and his work. And that's exciting news, and we'll look forward to having him on next week. If you have any topics or suggestions on things you want us to pose, feel free to drop them in the comments. And we might have some more exciting news after that as well. We're making some other requests of some people, and so we'll keep you posted as dates are confirmed and things are happening. And we're very excited about the future of No Power Panel here.
Well, I'm excited that now we can actually live up to the name in terms of being a panel.
Absolutely. This was a part of the naming. This was a part of the naming decision, right? Was we always wanted to be able to have other people on and to open up the space for a broader conversation of the left of politics. And yeah, we're excited that it's now going to be a panel next week.
Speaking of a panel, there was a panel of two this week in more pop culture news that was spotted at a Montreal restaurant. I'm trying to get better at my segues, which includes bringing up that it's a forced segue every time I do it. And that Justin Trudeau, former Prime Minister of Canada, was spotted at a Montreal restaurant with Katy Perry. I don't know if we have anything to say on this subject. Do you have anything to say on this subject? It was making headlines across the world. So, and then he was spotted at her concert. I will just say there has never been a more divorced man in the world. He is really speed running that divorced dad energy over the past year or so. And now he's jobless too, so it lets him have a lot of free time on his hands. You know, I would kill to be able to do like maybe 6 speaking engagements a year and make a few million. So that was it's a pretty good life. But
absolutely, the life of a former prime minister is I think probably one of the sweetest gigs you can get, and getting to go on a date with Katy Perry, not a bad side benefit either. I mean, look, I don't love Katy Perry and I don't love celebrity gossip, but I have been quite fascinated by this story, actually. Just because I'm so curious as to how something like this happens. Right? When you have someone who's a former prime minister and someone who's kind of a on the downswing pop star, B levels, maybe even C level pop star at this point. How do you end up in this situation?
Whose team is reaching out to who, right? Like who,
or who's sliding into whose DMs?
Yeah,
right.
Yeah, exactly.
Like is Katy Perry sending Justin Trudeau a message saying, "Hey, I'm in Montreal for a concert, and I randomly know that you live in Montreal," even though I can't imagine she actually follows Canadian politics with any sort of.
Or is Trudeau sliding
actual
into Katy
understanding.
Perry's DMs? And that's probably the more likely scenario if we're thinking about what you're saying. He's more likely to know she's in Montreal for a concert. He went to her concert, so he would know that than she is the other way around. So just food for thought, I guess.
Absolutely, food for thought. I'm very curious just in terms of that, just because I'm weird, and I also just it's a weird thought to have a real celebrity dating apparently a former prime minister who was treated like and I think that's maybe the thing that often gets forgotten by Canadian audiences, is we kind of look at it and go, well, he's got an approval rating in the 20s in Canada, and no one really liked him by the time he left office. But in the States, he was still Canada's hot young prime minister in a way. Even though he's now in his 50s and I guess there's an argument to be made that he's still attractive, but
he's like arguably is like, one of the more conventionally attractive world leaders. Like, you can't really fight. There's a lot of contention you can have on Trudeau's policy, but like, I'd say even at what is he now, like 51 or something, like he's still hot. Like, it's not like I don't know if we need to be having this debate, but
I don't either. But I mean, no, I 100%. I'm not saying Trudeau is not an attractive man. I'm just saying, like, Katy Perry was married to Orlando Bloom a couple of months ago, right? Like, Justin Trudeau is not Orlando Bloom.
Right. If you're comparing him on the scale of world leaders, he's definitely one of the hottest. But if you're comparing him on the scale of, actually, I was gonna say Katy Perry's
that Katy Perry could pull.
Okay, but you're saying men that Katy Perry could pull. You're
well,
not
I
saying
guess
men
she's
that Katy
on her
Perry
downswing
pulled
at that point.
Yeah, she also has dated some pretty awful men too that aren't that attractive, or like agreeable, like Russell Brand. So she's, if you actually look at men Katy Perry has been with, it's not like she's got a great track record. That's all I'm gonna say.
No, it's absolutely. Maybe the last thing to say on it is that it raises questions potentially if they continue dating, given her established taste in men in that way in terms of personality. It maybe makes us ask some questions about what about Justin Trudeau she's liking, if her track record is narcissistic, slightly unhinged people to a certain extent. All right. So, moving from our former prime minister to a man who hopes to be our next prime minister still, there's been some news out of Battle River-Crowfoot and the by-election there that's happening in a couple of weeks, Isaac. Pierre Poilievre, who is running for the Conservatives in that by-election after Damien Carrick stepped down to give him his seat, ostensibly, has done an all-candidates debate with 9 other candidates because the ballot has over 200 candidates on it. The longest ballot initiative, which has targeted prominent by-elections before, targeted Pierre Poilievre's riding of Carleton, broke the record at that point with 90-something names on the ballot. Now put over 200 names on this ballot. I'm pretty sure over 200 of these candidates all share the same official agent. And or somewhere around 200. The rest are a scattering of the other parties and independents. But in response to this, Elections Canada has announced that instead of putting every single candidate's name on every ballot, they're going to provide a list of the candidates to every voter in the ballot booth. And then the ballot is just going to be a blank line where the voter is supposed to write the name of their preferred candidate. So it's a write-in campaign to avoid having to print a sheet of paper with over 200 names on it. Yeah. What's your thoughts on that, Isaac?
I have a couple thoughts. One, they shouldn't have called it an all candidates debate. They should have called it a 5% of candidates debate. Two, I'm wondering how they came up with the criteria. I didn't look into it for who got to be on that debate stage, because it's not like they have an election.
It was first come, first serve.
Okay.
So they invited, I think, a bunch of the candidates, and then the first 10 to say yes got to be there.
That's because I was like, there's not going to be some like debates commission that has thresholds. I know we've talked about that in the past of polling, because there's no polling with everyone's name on it and so forth. So, and in terms of the, as someone who has been a scrutineer before for elections, I know what goes into counting ballots. So I'm sure this will make the results take much longer to come in. I don't think it will matter, because I do think Poilievre will win by a hefty margin. and we'll know that pretty soon after results start coming in. But I do believe this will give some conservative conspiracy theorists, fuel to start, coming up with reasons of why this is all a big anti-democracy ploy to keep Pierre Poilievre out of a seat in the legislature. So those are my thoughts, my general thoughts on Battle River Crowfoot right now.
I think that that's fair. I think that if anything, this probably helps Poilievre, because he has the most recognizable name in the riding. And so if you're showing up to vote and, you're a kind of conservative person, but you're not 100% locked in at some point, you're likely to get to the point of just writing in Poilievre's name because it's the easiest thing to do.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that's a point that should be made. I think that this also disadvantages candidates with difficult to spell names, difficult to remember names, longer names. Not that, I think that this was going to be close in the first place, but you can imagine a scenario where if this is the way that all of our ballots transitioned, if this was kind of the response to the longest ballot initiative on a national scale, was Elections Canada just going, well, we're not going to allow for this possibility anymore, then candidates with longer, difficult to spell, ethnically diverse, whatever else names would start probably being disadvantaged, and you would start having to run campaigns going, here's how you spell my name, right? As I'm preparing for my municipal campaign next year, I'm having to deal with, okay, how am I gonna approach the fact that my name is Noam and there are gonna be voters who have never heard of that name before, have never spelled that name before, have never. And so as I'm designing my signs and things like that, that is an active thing that I'm thinking about. If I had to expect every voter to be able to write in my name without relatively getting the spelling correctly, which Elections Canada has said is going to be the expectation, then you end up in a situation where people start having to run different kinds of campaigns based on those kinds of factors.
Yeah. But it also helps that your name has gold in it, because it's easy to remember and can be has good associations. I remember we had signs in our garage for the longest time from our grandfather, who had the signs that said gold for green from when he ran for the Green Party, and the top part, gold was in green on gold background, and then green was in green on gold background. So there's fun things you can do with signs with
absolutely. Absolutely, especially municipally, where you get to really design them yourself and you don't have a party trying to design them for you. That's clever on Papa Joe's part. I don't know that I had actually seen those. That's smart. I'm going to have to give that some thought.
Yeah, I have no idea where they are now, but they were in my childhood home's garage for a while. I have no
I'll
idea.
have to send your mom a message.
Yeah.
All right, so that's that. I think it's time for winners and losers, Isaac.
Yeah, I'd like to start with winners because it's most related to what we were just talking
interesting.
about.
All right, go ahead.
Okay, I am going to give my winners this week to the longest ballot committee, because they have, I think, effectively achieved what they sought out to do with this initiative. The initiative itself, and I'll say it because this is what they sought out to do, is they're in protest of the first past the post system, right? And they have been able to gain a lot of news coverage and media attention. They might change the election nomination like rules like going forward to not allow groups like this to have an effect in the future. But for the time being, they are having an effect. They're having an effect on the discourse, and they're having an effect on the discourse enough that people keep saying their name, that people will Google it, maybe look into first past the post voting, see the problems with it, maybe understand why other countries don't use it in terms of representation. So I think they have been effective in this initiative, and they were my winners this week.
Interesting. Hold that thought. My winner this week is Pierre Poilievre, because of the longest ballot committee. They have made it more difficult, actually, for anyone to effectively challenge him in this by-election. They've made it much easier for him to run the kind of campaign in Battle River-Crowfoot that he needs to be able to run, that is just a purely name ID campaign.
You're living in a fantasy land. He was winning no matter what. He was, no matter what.
He was, but giving voters the option to put his name, to check his name or check Bonnie Critchley's name, there's the potential for it to be a 55-45 race when all things are square like that. For any of these, none of these candidates are going to be able to achieve the kind of name ID that Pierre Poilievre has. He is the national leader of a political party. He is going to be able to sweep to victory. This is going to help him survive his leadership review in January, because he's going to win 80-something% of the vote in an election conducted this way. And it's going to help him get the Conservative Party secured behind him.
I think you are basing assumption on assumption on assumption on assumption to the point where it's like, in this world, the you're not giving voters enough credit that the difference between 80% of Pierre Poilievre vote and a 55% Poilievre, so 25% vote swing, just because instead of having 9 or 10 names on a ballot, you have 200, I think is like, I don't see any world where
I think it affects the turnout.
Random independent candidates affects that many votes.
No, I think it affects the turnout. I think that in a scenario where you have a bunch of like the 200 names on a ballot, and you give people all of those choices with equal footing, and you let people just check where they're going to check, and you run it the way that any other election has been run, you end up in a situation where people recognize their neighbors' names as they're scanning the ballot and go, "Oh, I'm going to vote for Jim. He's a good guy."
You're not giving voters enough credit, in my opinion.
I think that the turnout is going to be low enough that a couple hundred votes happening like that, it could be that kind of factor difference. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe in a couple of weeks we'll come back and say this was a week where no one got his winner wrong. You know, we've both had those weeks in the past. This might be one of mine, but I'm sticking to it for now.
I'm just okay. I'll believe it. I'll believe it when I see it. But the problem is you can't see it because you can't know what the alternative situation would have been. So exactly. I get to stay in my truth, which is that the voter base is smart enough to know that their neighbor, like, it's such like these are such fairy tales we're spinning. So all right, I'll continue to let it spin. But that's why we're here, right? So
that's why we're here. And honestly, I was struggling to come up with a winner this week.
No, stay 10 tones down. We need the conflict. There needs
We
to
need
be some conflict. We
Some
can't just every
conflict.
week you name your winner and I go, oh, that's a good winner. I name my
Yeah,
winner and you go,
no,
that's a good
this
winner.
is
We need
good. No,
stand 10 toes
I'm
down.
not saying I'm taking it back. I'm saying I think that he is a winner this week. And there wasn't another winner that I thought was a bigger winner than him. So I'm saying that on another week, something like this might not have been enough to get him a winner spot. On this week, for me, nobody else was a bigger winner than that. And so I think that is where I'm coming from on that.
Sounds good.
It'll be a fun clip though. All right. Loser. Who's your loser this week, Isaac?
My loser this week is Canada as a whole. We've spent decades as a country losing our independence. We never really had it. We were tied to the UK. We then just kind of severed ourselves to become more tied with America economically, socially, culturally. And I think we continually in our history see the consequences of this this action of not, I remember in history class, there's like stories we tell ourselves, like when you're taking like grade 10 Canadian history, and it's like, with this decision, Canada proved itself an independent nation. And I'm like, I don't think Canada still has proved itself an independent nation. So I think, and we're seeing the results of that with being able to be at the whims of a U.S. president like we have been proven to be this week. So there you go. Canada's my loser this week.
That's fair. That's a good one. My loser this week is Donald John Trump. I think that he really hurt himself this week. I think that this tariff action is going to really bite him in the butt. I think because I am less convinced than you that it's going to be a fully short-term thing, I think that what's going to happen is as it stretches longer and longer and as people feel the more impact from it, and as he potentially digs in his toes around it, as his instinct often is, despite the taco of it all, I think that he will continue to be hurt politically. I think that there are Democrats who are starting to, more and more of them are starting to wake up on how to correctly fight right now. And I think that as that continues, as we approach 2026, in coordination with the tariffs, his polling is already really, really bad. If the Democrats weren't polling worse than him right now, the talk would be that it was in disaster areas for him for 2026 and for the Republicans in 2028. And so I think that, even if the Democrats don't fully improve, there's going to be such a backlash as the economy really starts to suffer. There are so many states where Canada is the number one trading partner, and they are all going to be hurt economically by this. And Trump isn't going to see the kinds of benefits from the tariffs that he's been promising people. And so in coordination with all of that, I think it really puts him on track to be a pretty significant loser.
Fair loser. And I will say to your loser pick, totally deserved.
All right. Sounds good. We agreed on one and disagreed on one of my picks. All right. Thanks for joining us this week for No Power Panel. Please join us again next week as we hear from Yves Engler on his campaign to be the next leader of Canada's NDP.
Thanks.
Have a great week.